What's up, everyone? Welcome to another Sales Hacker webinar. My name is Scott Barker, Head of Partnerships and Sales at Sales Hacker. So we're talking about a topic that is near and dear to my heart for sure, something that I put a lot of importance on throughout my career, and it's how to build meaningful connections to accelerate your career. So important. And before I introduce my guest today, a few quick housekeeping matters. This will be recorded, so if you need to hop off or you want to share it out with a colleague that you think can benefit, we'll send this over to you a few hours after this ends. So this webinar, we've got a few slides, but primarily will be a Q&A style webinar. So I'll be grilling my guest over here with some questions around this topic. And as always, we want this to be super interactive. So we want to answer questions that you, our community, has. So please jump on to the question feature and get involved throughout. So actually right now, if you want to, let's see who's in the house. Tell us your name, title, company, where you're from, and maybe we'll do a couple shout outs. But anyway, without further ado, I want to introduce my guests. We're joined by Gregg Macbeth, Head of Revenue at Node.io. Gregg, welcome to Sales Hacker.
Thanks, Scott. It's great to be here. Hello, everyone.
Yeah, we're pumped to have you, and thanks for giving your time today. So, as always, I like to provide a little more color, especially because you're a colorful guy. We just had a cool chat all around poker previous to this. But so Gregg Macbeth is the Head of Revenue, as mentioned, at Node.io. That is an AI-based discovery engine that identifies personalized and relevant opportunities for people and companies. Gregg actually began his career, as we were talking about, as a poker professional in Las Vegas, which I find really cool, and ventured into sales basically on a whim and at a suggestion of an ex-girlfriend who worked in the space. And since then, he has led sales and business strategy at several startups and specializes in sales psychology and decision making. Gregg graduated from Stanford University in 2004 with a bachelor's in mechanical engineering, actually. And when you're not working, you talked about, you're playing poker, attending Giants games, enjoying wine, and climbing boulders. So super pumped to pick your brain today. It's going to be a good one.
Awesome, thanks.
Sweet. Okay, so let's talk. So the topic, how to build meaningful connections to accelerate your career. So I'm going to just dive into it, and let's kind of go broad at the beginning. And what advice would you give to someone who's not very good at networking, but sees the inherent value in doing it well? We can't all be life of the party, Rico Suave. Perhaps they're an introvert and they don't like to small talk. So what advice would you give those folks?
Yeah, that question is very near and dear to my heart. I'm someone who doesn't particularly like networking. I'm definitely more on the introverted side, on the spectrum of probably what you would consider to be a typical salesperson. And it's really hard. And I think the most important thing to recognize is, one, the value in networking and the value in building strong connections. There's a million different tasks that any sales professional is going to be required to do on a day-to-day basis. And a lot of this comes down to prioritizing your time. And there's no question that building a strong network, building strong connections with the right people can help accelerate your career, help build your pipeline, et cetera. And so the first and foremost thing to do is really just to sort of understand and internalize how important that is. From within that, then it's really important to be selective and I think be true to yourself and to your personality and to what you do like and do care about. My wife's someone who is incredibly extroverted, and she's more than happy to go out to a bunch of different events, talk to 30 different people at each event, and she gets a ton of value from that. She's totally energized for that. If I go out and do half of the amount of work that she does, I come back just drained and exhausted, and I need to take a rest day and go sit in a sauna or something to recover from that process. So I have to be a lot more selective about the types of events that I will go to or the types of methodologies that I use to go connect with people. Usually when I'm going to network, what I'm looking for are 2 or 3 people maybe in an event that I know are attending, either because they're a panelist or they're a regular part of a group, like a sales hacker or enterprise sales form or whatever it is, and really find those couple people and try to build really, really close, deep, meaningful relationships. So when I go to these events now, there are certain people I'll go interact with that I've built these relationships with over time that I don't necessarily have to go small talk to. Right? I don't have to talk about the weather or my job or what I did last week. Right? It kind of goes right into the meat of why we have this relationship, and that is a lot more impactful for me and something that comes a little bit more naturally. So I think that's an important piece. The second part of this, I know we'll dive a little bit more into this as we go, but really leveraging technology. It's great for people who don't necessarily want to go out there and kind of be the first person to run up to the speaker of the conference, right? Or doesn't necessarily feel comfortable doing that. There's so many different ways that you can use technology to help build connections and do so outside of just the context of I'm doing this because I'm trying to sell to this person or market to this person. There are a lot of ways to do that to actually really build strong, long-lasting relationships virtually.
Totally. Yeah. So you had a few great points there. So if you're introverted, it's one, just stressing the importance to yourself. Like if you're going to be a sales professional, you're going to pick this career, whether you're introverted or extroverted, you have to know the importance of networking and what it can do for your career. Another one, be selective. So know exactly who you want to talk to and kind of hone in. And then three, with the aid of technology, you can have a more relevant conversation that's not just driven by, sell. I think those are awesome points. And okay, so we have, let's field this one. Okay, so I like this question. This is a really good question. So influential and experienced people. So these are typically the decision makers. These are the VPs of sales. These are the CROs, VPs of marketing, whoever you sell into. These people get hit up all the time. People are asking them for help. Gregg, I'm sure I bet you have an inbox on LinkedIn that's this long of people asking for your time and different asks. So what are a couple tips to break through that noise if you want to make a connection and work with someone in that position? And maybe you're not in that position. Maybe you're a BDR. Maybe you're an account executive. How do you get to that level?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think it's something that I certainly learned kind of more trial by fire early in my career, was really figuring out how to engage with those decision makers. I know that's something that every sales professional struggles with at some point, right? I kind of get that one person that I know is going to be transformative to hitting my quota or getting that next job or whatever that next opportunity is. And the way that I really started to reframe how I thought about this was I really kind of looked at it from more like a psychology perspective, right? So Scott, I know you mentioned that that's very big into psychology, and that drove a lot of my interest in poker early on and kind of how I approach things at the tables. But there's a lot of overlap between succeeding in that type of environment, succeeding in sales, and really understanding how people think. And so, an example I can give, and I always like to kind of try to bring things back to first principles of why do people act the way they do. And I'm sure that most of you out there have probably reached out to somebody and felt a bit miffed that maybe that they ignored you, or you felt like they weren't interested in what you had to offer, even though what you had to offer is really valuable. And so the way I kind of like to think about this is I always imagine this this old how were we 100,000 years ago? And so I imagine you're sitting in a cave and you're going out and hunting for meat, and you got to bring this back to your family, and then all of a sudden some stranger comes up to you and says, hey, look, I noticed that you're succeeding 10% of the time. I believe that by cooperating we can succeed 40% of the time and really kind of double how much meat we get to bring back and improve our survival odds, et cetera. So if you take a step back and think about what that must have been like to someone in that type of environment where you were more nomadic and didn't necessarily have these huge communities you could count on, that's a very risky proposition. You have to trust this complete stranger who may have competing motivations and incentives for you. And so kind of how in that type of environment, what would basically make you trust that person? And so, one thing that might help you trust that person is if they said, I believe in this so much that I'm actually going to give you all of the meat that we have, right? All the kills that I've had in the past day or two, I'm going to actually give those to your family because I believe in this process so much, right? And so what did that really do, right? It did two things. One, it said, I'm sort of making an assessment that, you're still going to be on my side. You're going to make this, sort of declaration together that we're going to go after this common goal. And the second thing that it does is it puts kind of, literal, in this case, literal, but generally more figurative skin in the game, right? It's saying that I have enough confidence in this system or this way to network or operate, that I'm willing to sort of give you the thing that's really standing between me and my survival. And so, that's obviously somewhat of a contrived example, but the principles still apply, right? If you're offering something to somebody in a sort of more altruistic sense, that gives you the opportunity to start to build that trust with that person, right? They're going to be more likely to think of you as someone who has maybe their best interest, or at minimum, a collective best interest in mind. And so one of the things that I will say to folks are really figuring out how to get involved or get in touch with somebody that is important for them, is offer help first. And I don't mean this in the sense of just necessarily commenting on a LinkedIn post. Now that may be a way to get interest or noticed. But really offer to help them, right? Look at what they care about. Are they attending conferences? If they're attending conferences or they're hosting conferences or hosting events, offer to volunteer at those events, right? Go, just say, hey, I'm willing to go just check in people for you. It sounds incredibly menial and boring. Get that, right? But that's really saying that, hey, I'm willing to do the things that are required that are important to you to help build that relationship and show you that I care enough. Figure out kind of where they are, right? What they're doing. So, if they're hosting events is one piece of this, but, are they attending things that may not be related to work? Right? People tend to associate with people who have common interests, common values. Are there certain things that they're really passionate about that may not be work related? If you have the opportunity to engage or connect in that type of environment, that can be really valuable, and that can be a great way to build that relationship.
Totally. I can't agree more with everything that you just said there. And I love, framing it in that, 100,000 years ago example kind of makes everything so simple and strips away some of the complexities that we like to think that we live in now, but there's still just human to human interaction at the end of the day. And so a few things came to mind for me when you were saying that, Greg. So an example that I had, so I was just over in Spain with my girlfriend doing some working and some traveling. And we went to see our favorite singer named James Arthur. And it was like a really intimate venue. There was probably 80 people there. And so he was hanging out with everyone. And there was this long lineup of people. There's 40 plus people. They want to take photos. They want to talk to him. They want to engage with this guy. And you can tell he just kind of looks exhausted and depleted. So we hung around for a bit. And when it was kind of our turn to go and interact with them, first thing I led with, I was like, hey man, you look a little depleted. Can I buy you a drink? Or can I get you some food? Have you had a chance to eat yet? And the look on this guy's face, man, he just went white. And he was like, man, you're the first person that hasn't come at me with an ask. Hey, I want a photo. Hey, can we include my wife? Can we do this? And it was just ask. So it was such a shock to him when I led with exactly what you're saying, right? It's giving value. And we ended up having, a 20-minute conversation with the guy and got to know him really well. And it ended up, being a really positive interaction. So I think that's exactly the example, whether it's, meeting your favorite singer or a prospect. I think it goes down to exactly what you're saying.
And giving value that's clearly relative not only to the person but to the moment, right?
Yeah.
So, what you described is, does James Arthur, does he value having someone offer him a drink at any other point in time? Maybe not. As a successful singer, I'm sure he doesn't have to worry about figuring out where his next drink's going to come from. But at that moment, that was a really clear need for him, right? And so, one of the things that we have access to nowadays, right, through social media, through other sort of real-time communication methods, is exactly what is top of mind for people. And so not only do you have the opportunity through social media to really understand kind of the underlying inner workings, inner values of the people that you're trying to connect with, you have the real-time needs of those people, and being able to offer solutions to both is a great way to build those relationships and kind of get to a place where you feel satisfied with how those interactions went.
Totally. Absolutely. And I think so. I think the kicker there, like you said, the drink had really nothing to do with it, really. So that was kind of the value. But I think it was the context before the value. It was saying, hey, man, you look a little depleted, right? I think that's where the connection actually happened, was just because like, oh my God, this guy kind of identifies that I'm giving a lot back to my fans and I'm feeling, a little bit, under the weather because of it. I think that was what actually progressed it. So,
Yeah.
uh,
So, and I think I actually think this is something we should maybe dive into specifics a
yeah,
little bit more. It's really important.
yeah,
So, I mean, a lot of I've watched these types of webinars, right? Just generally, right? I love to stay in touch with the sales community, but also sort of branch outside of this. I think one of the things that's always most helpful for me is really understanding, well, okay, well, how do I actually do this in practice?
right,
Because that's a hard thing to sometimes extrapolate.
yep,
So I think one of the, I can just share a few specific anecdotes. I mean, one of the best ways to build these types of relationships is to facilitate introductions. So, as salespeople, we're incredibly fortunate. It doesn't matter how senior, how junior, how experienced, right? What territory you live in, where you live. Like, we have an advantage of having broader networks, whether strong connections, or kind of weaker connections, than most professionals across the planet. And so the opportunity, the chance that there's someone out there who could benefit from someone that we know, it's really unparalleled. And so, I think one of the things to think through is you guys are looking at here's this person that I either want as a mentor or a prospect or a partner or whatever it is. Think through who you know, right, whether tangentially or whether really well, that could potentially provide value. I mean, maybe you just say, hey, look, I saw you guys talking about these two similar viewpoints. Would love to connect you. I mean, that's not only is that potentially helping that person out, it's really putting a lot of skin in the game, and it signals a real sort of investment on your part and like an altruism on your part, because you have very little to gain from that directly, but you have a lot to lose, right, if that connection doesn't work out. So facilitating introductions is a really important thing. I also have found that I love sending people interesting articles or books if they're talking about a topic or interested in a topic or just have questions about it. I remember we partnered with Chris Voss at Node, who some of you guys might have known. He wrote a book called Never Split the Difference about negotiation. You guys haven't read it. Yeah, it's a great book. So we worked with him on a couple different events, and I remember we talked to a partner who was talking about how they were struggling with particular negotiation techniques and like what are some of the best negotiation books. So we sent that person a copy of Voss's book. And got a letter back and said, hey, thanks, this was phenomenal. And that's someone we've kept in touch with now, and we don't have any sort of sales typical relationship, but it's someone that at any point I have no doubt that we could call this person and say, hey, let's talk and let's kind of figure out how to work together in some capacity. So there are very simple things you can do nowadays, right, with the amount of information available, the ease of ordering something on an Amazon or other online medium. There's really kind of no excuse anymore for not understanding what people care about and figuring out creative ways to connect with them. It just requires the investment of time to do so.
Totally. Two great actionable things there. So facilitate intros, super important, and do so, like you said, without expecting anything in return. It's super easy to tell when you're kind of being guided down this pathway. So facilitate intros, and then books. I use that one all the time. I love sending relevant books that I've read. And then one more thing I'll actually add, kind of from an actionable standpoint. So early in my career, when I was at like a BDR, because I bet a lot of people that are listening to this, if they're maybe on the lower end, like, okay, maybe my network's not that strong yet, so maybe I can't facilitate really powerful intros yet. But you still will have a network. So whether you're a BDR or you're an account executive, you probably have a lot of peer connections. So you probably have a lot of other BDRs and a lot of other AEs that you're connected with. And what I would do, I used to sell into VPs marketing, VPs of sales, and I would find out if they are looking currently for any AEs or business development reps at their company. And that's kind of the value I would lead with when I'm speaking to them, or like at events or whatever. I'd be like, hey, like, I actually noticed that you guys are looking for some BDRs. I have a massive network of, people that are in business development or account executives. How about I see if I can send you a few candidates? And then they would obviously be pretty excited, and then that would allow me to progress the conversation further.
Yeah.
Okay. Perfect. Okay. So we dove deep on that one. I loved it. Thank you for all the insight there. Okay. So how important is this? let's take a step back. How important is this really? Like out of 10, how important is this subject that we're really diving into?
Yeah, I'd put it at least an 8,
Yeah.
if not higher, just in terms of relative importance of all the things that we can do. I think that networking and really building strong connections is frankly, you can kind of think of it almost as of a force multiplier in a sense. Depending upon the strength of those relationships, right, the force multiplier can be massive. A lot of times you have to have sort of requisite skills and requisite basics to be successful, right, in the sales environment. But having those connections allows you to use those in ways that frankly are unimaginable otherwise. I think of the ways that I've gotten my 1, 2, 3, 4 past jobs. My poker was a whole separate question, but when I look at the other job steps I've made in my career, every single one has come through some connection that I've made somehow. It's sometimes it's been accidental, right? With the ex-girlfriend who suggested I get into sales, and other times it's been very intentional. So it's I have somebody that I know that is connected to a certain company or industry or opportunity that I will then go reach out to and ask for support on. Now it's not to say that I wouldn't have found other interesting opportunities, had I not built those connections, but I think one of the things that particularly becomes important, and this is especially true once you start progressing in your career, is really figuring out where you want to go next. It's very easy is the wrong word. It's easier to sort of just take a path of going where the sort of the next opportunity presents itself.
Right.
But if you want to be really intentional and kind of get yourself to a career that is really meaningful and really drives you, I can imagine that, just like, not every, engineer wants to work at, Google or Apple, right? Not every salesperson necessarily wants to work at Salesforce, or not. They don't want to work at a startup, right? Everyone's got different priorities, different needs, different goals, and things that interest them. And so, being sort of intentional about how you manage networking and how you manage career progression, the opportunities that are available to you are exponentially greater if you have a strong network and a strong series of connections. And I know in the sort of quick intro paragraph to this webinar, we talked about Nick Cage getting his opportunities because he's part of the Coppola family, or Kushner getting in the White House because he's married to Ivanka Trump, or Ivana, whichever one. So there's those opportunities. Yeah, I'm not going to rabbit hole from a political perspective, but obviously, like those are people that have gotten to a certain place, but their opportunities that have been in front of them have been exponentially magnified because of who they've had relationships with. And you can't choose whose family you're born into, but you can certainly choose the type of people you surround yourself with, and the types of people that you choose to sort of let into the very limited time that you have throughout your day. And so I really think it can't be stated more heavily enough that it is really, really important to be able to go in and kind of use connection building, use networking as a way to further your career and to further your ability to just be an effective salesperson as well.
Totally. Absolutely. Agree. It's going to allow you to be, like you said, proactive rather than reactive to just like, oh, this opportunity came. Oh, this opportunity came. You can actually have some foresight and do some planning when you do have the network in place. Yep. One exercise that I think is great if you are still, scared about networking or whatever, just look back at where you got in your career, and you'll find that there's someone in every stage of the way that kind of opened the door for you. Typically, once you kind of hit, maybe not your first job, but typically once you get going in higher positions, you basically need some sort of inroad to get to where you want to go.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is a good one, and bring it back to kind of actionable things. So we know it's important. I think most people on this webinar should know, building connections is important as a sales professional, but we all have 101 other things to do on a day-to-day basis. So how do I, as a sales professional, make time for this?
Yeah, well, I guess I would ask, how do you as a sales professional make time for anything else?
Mm-hmm.
And the answer when I ask this to most people is they'll say, well, I'll put it on my calendar. Right? For better or worse, right? We kind of, sales professionals, we live and die by our calendar. And so just like anything else, scheduling it is really important. And scheduling it does not necessarily mean, you have to pick an event that occurs at a certain time and do that. It could be as simple as, I'm going to set aside an intentional 30 minutes a day to go on, LinkedIn or Twitter or just do some online research to find the people that I'm interested in connecting with and figuring out what they're talking about, right? What they're doing, what they care about. It's really important just to set aside that time. If you don't, you're not going to do it. So when I originally started at Node, one of the things that was really important to me was just making sure I went to the gym enough. So I'd schedule out in the morning. I'd say, this is the time I'm going to the gym. If you're trying to schedule a time here, don't bother me. Like this is important. This is, my health is top priority. I'm going to make it a part of the day. And I do the same thing with different activities. So it's not just, this is something you can apply outside of building connections and networking, or you can apply it to anything. So I'll set aside a certain amount of time to do some writing. If I just want to take some time just to read or kind of, do something that's more for me time, I'll still schedule that into my calendar. And I think it's a very underutilized thing. And it's also something where you really have to be pretty strict about it, because stuff comes up all the time, right? There's always a million different things you could do. And it's super easy to say, this is the me time that I'm going to use to go find these people that I am interested in. But a prospect, wants to schedule a meeting at this time. And there's certain things obviously that you can't avoid and can't reschedule, and you can't always control what your manager is necessarily going to try to push on you. But you can be pretty deliberate about ensuring that you do get what you need and that you're pushing back when possible to ensure that the time you do schedule is really valuable. There's also kind of a mental model that is often helpful, that I found helpful, which is really kind of reframing it in reframing the concept of building relationships in selfish terms. And I know we've talked about building connections from an altruistic perspective, but altruism often is sort of masked selfish intention in the sense, right? And I don't mean that in a pejorative way, right? I mean that in a way you're looking out for yourself, and that's totally okay to do. And so, kind of thinking of it as not, oh God, doing this is something that I have to do. Nobody wants that. To kind of think that they're obligated to do a particular task. But thinking of it from the perspective of, this thing is really going to be the most valuable lever that I have for my career. And if I want to get to X, Y, Z, right, the things I'm sitting there striving for and burning the midnight oil for and working on weekends for, those are the things that you really are going to find a lot more value against, if you reframe it in the right way. And so that's going to kind of help push you through those situations where it's a task or something that you just frankly don't love, and kind of get you to really prioritize that and put that in your day to day.
Mm-hmm. Great points. Yeah, look at it like you're kind of planting seeds. Every time you're out there networking, you're planting seeds that, might not pay off right away, but you never know who's going to be that, maybe fringe connection that is when your name comes up and you're in the final stage of an interview, or, your deal's going sideways and he's calling a favor. You never know who that person is going to be. And, if you put in the time, then you just have a wider net to go from, basically.
And you make a great point that you have to play, in a sense, it is like planting seeds, and just like a tree doesn't grow in a day. Oftentimes a network or a relationship doesn't grow in a day or a week or a month, right? And I think part of understanding that it is a long-term game, that's kind of very anathema to us as salespeople, or we maybe live and die in a month or a quarter, or maybe most of the calendar year. But you really have to think about networking from a long-term perspective. Right? There's certainly things that you can do to accelerate certain timelines in a situation where that's critical. Understanding that it's probably not going to bear fruit immediately, and that's okay. Really kind of understanding it and enjoying it, or sort of just doing it for the sake of doing it, right? And recognizing that it's important. That's a really important hump to get over.
Yeah, definitely. And so I think it's a really cool thing to actually dive into quickly, because I think, we all, are kind of in it for ourselves, like you said, right? Even if you mask it or you trick yourself, you're in it for a personal gain typically. And a lot of times you want that quickly. And, you mentioned, like, how can you accelerate timelines? And I wouldn't urge, people that are listening to this in the community, don't accelerate all of your timelines. Sometimes, people need time to build trust. But how in the past have you been able to accelerate timelines with people maybe you just met and you hit it off and there is some way you can help them?
Yeah. Yeah, well, I'll give sort of two answers to this, and one will sound a bit like a cop out, but it's really not intended that way. Um,
Okay.
I think about any sort of deal cycle you've been in. Right? There's always going to be pressure. There's always time pressure. There's the end of the quarter, the end of the month, the end of the year, whatever it is. There's always a
Yeah.
pressure for as salespeople to hit a particular timeline, and those timelines are often outside of our control. On the same token, the buyer may or may not have a timeline. That's something that's important to suss out early. But the reality is that 90% of the time they're not going to be operating on your timeline. And so the things that you have to do to drive that urgency, they really start before that timeline's about to hit, right? So getting them emotionally excited, bought in to the idea of your solution, making them sort of emotionally feel or understand the potential pain if they don't move forward with purchasing a solution like yours, right? Those are all things that as humans we're sort of wired to understand, right? We don't want to miss out on the latest and greatest thing. And so, if we're already in that mindset of where we see something as something we potentially miss out on, we're going to be a lot more receptive to someone that's pushing something forward. So, going back to this idea of providing value and helping someone in a way that really impacts them positively. By doing that effectively and by doing that early and often, you're going to set yourself up to a position where you can sort of call in a quote unquote favor a lot more readily. Outside of that type of situation, it's much more difficult, and you're going to have to rely on a little bit more luck, and it's something that's not nearly as scalable. But I think the most important thing, when it comes to really pushing something forward, and this is going to sound super, super banal, but sometimes you just have to ask somebody. And I'm always amazed at how often people don't get what they want, and then when you kind of go through a retrospective and really try to understand what happened, you say, well, did you ask for it? And they'll say, well, no. I hoped that so and so would be able to read my mind or understand what I was looking for. Look, everyone that we're talking to, and all of us are incredibly busy, and it's very hard for us to necessarily sort of operate on someone else's timeline or emotional schedule, and so. Sometimes just asking them and saying, hey, look, I know this is out of the blue. We had a couple chats, and I hope that this X, Y, Z went well. Really would just love if you would you mind doing me a brief favor? Would you open to a brief favor? And make it small, right? I mean, if you're trying to sell them something, it doesn't necessarily have to be, hey, go buy our product. It could be, hey, we'd love to just get your feedback on this. You can sort of soft sell it in a sense. And, for those of you who've read Chris Voss's book, right, leverage a lot of the techniques that he talks about, leverage the no, right? Give the idea of asking for a yes. What you really want to do is have someone basically give you a no. So if you can phrase questions or phrase, certain paths of the conversation to lead to a no. And what a no does from a personal perspective, right, we'll say yes oftentimes just to be polite. Your parents will ask you, did you like the socks that we gave you for Christmas? And you'll say yes, because you don't want to piss them off, right? So we say it to be polite, but if you say, if you rephrase in a way that, say like, well, were your socks the most important thing that you got for Christmas? And you say, well, no, not really, but I appreciate them, right? It's a lot less defensive, right? Psychologically, it flips a bit of a switch. Chris talks about it, how he used that as a technique when he was doing hostage negotiation, and it's really powerful and something that I've coached my team on, and we use internally. I use it in personal relationships too. If I want somebody to do something that maybe they're not going to want to do, I try to reframe it in a way that gets them to answer no, right? But think of it a little differently, and it's amazing how powerful just like slight reframing actually is in terms of getting people sort of at least to accept the idea of moving it at the speed at which you're hoping to move.
Yeah. Great points. And again, I can't stress that book is amazing. Chris Voss's book. It's got filled with takeaways. So definitely pick it up if you haven't out there. Great points. Okay, so we've got some questions from the audience. So let's take one if you're into it. Okay, so Sohan, thank you so much for your question, Sohan. So this is talking about, I guess, building meaningful relationships at the beginning of your career. And he wants, can you talk about some of the challenges faced when you're first starting your sales career and how did you address them? More importantly, did you have mentors?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there's a couple challenges that happen when you're early, and some of it is some of it is just the reality that as someone who's early in their career, who's maybe trying to connect or network someone that's a little more senior in their career, the ability to sort of provide value is much tougher. I mean, frankly, let's just be honest here, right? It's a lot harder because you know fewer things, fewer people, right? You're not in a place where you have access necessarily to as many resources as someone who's been in a career for 20, 30 years. So there's sort of an inherent barrier that gets put in place. The other barrier is one that is just really sort of a barrier of scale. There are a lot more people in junior positions than there are in senior positions. And so it's a lot easier to sort of get drowned out in a sense in the noise, and not necessarily be able to sort of break through as readily as you would if you were sort of quote unquote competing against fewer people. So I think kind of going back to this question of how you spend your time, at an early stage, it's really, really important to do two things. And the first is, one, find a couple of really, really meaningful potential connections and invest a lot in those. You have very limited time. I imagine an incredibly stressful day to day, and you're dealing with probably a lot of frustration and a lot of rejection, as any salesperson can attest to at this stage of their career. But figuring out who those two or three people are that you think are really going to help be those sort of pillars for you as you build your network, that's really important. And a lot of it goes back to figuring out, what are their values, what do they care about, what are they looking for, and where can you provide that value? And I think a lot of times people early will say, oh, I don't think I can help this person. They have access to X, Y, Z. There are a lot of things that people have access to, but there are always things that people are looking for, right? Where there's an opportunity, and we talked about some of the ways you can do that, right? Facilitate introductions, send them things that might be relevant. There are a million ways you can do this, and it really only takes one. So I think you have to treat it as something where not every person you try to connect with is necessarily going to be interested. That's the reality, right? We deal with rejection on a day-to-day basis. It's part of the job, and the same thing's going to be true of the network. You may do all sorts of nice things for someone, and they may not be interested. They may just take that and say, all right, I'm going to go use this, and I'm not going to worry about you as a person. And that sucks, and that's a terrible feeling, but that's the reality. And so I think eventually you will find a situation where you do bring in someone who is really valuable and can provide a lot of sage advice and help you grow your career. On the flip side of this, it is important to cast some of it a wide net. And you can't just, if you're sort of think of it from the perspective of betting on companies, right? I mean, you look at venture capital firms, and even the best firms are not making one investment a year. Why is that, right? Because you can look at all the different factors that may make somebody a great mentor or make a company a great investment, but you don't know for sure, right? You're making an educated guess. And by the same token, so you have to sort of diversify somewhat. Now, that doesn't mean that you can spread your time, spread the same amount of investment over 1,000 people, right, or 1,000 companies in that example. But you have to be a little thoughtful around your time. So, focus on the two or three people that you say, this person aligns with where I want to go in my career. I think they have a ton to offer. I think I have a ton to offer them. I'm going to invest, 70% of my time there. But the other 30%, I'm going to take the 50 or 100 people, and I'm going to follow them on LinkedIn. If you have Sales Navigator, or you're using a solution like Note or whatever it is, figuring out ways to engage with them at scale without taking a ton of your time. That also gives you a bit of a wide net that, hey, maybe you find out that after a few interactions that one of those people, you have a lot more in common with them than you thought, right? Or maybe they really just sort of take to you for whatever reason, because maybe they see, you as a sort of an analog to them early in their career. They're willing to help you. So you have to balance both approaches to do that at an early stage.
Totally. Absolutely. I agree. And being able to, when you have more, let's say, mentors, you can kind of pick and choose things from them. Not all of them are going to be rock solid in every aspect. So I think that's a great point. And then also something that I've done, so mentors have been incredibly helpful in my career. I wouldn't be anywhere close to where I am now without a lot of people taking me under their wing and showing me the ropes. And I also looked at it from go find mentors, yes, that are you in 10 years or who you want to be, but also go a little outside of that realm. Like you can find mentors maybe in the persona that you sell into. Like that can be incredibly helpful too. Like if maybe you're not a marketer, but you sell into VP of marketing, well, go find a VP of marketing that will kind of guide you through, because you can still have a million takeaways, right? There's like career advice and then there's actual role advice. So, and that will kind of help you understand how those people think in their day to day and the language to use and what they care about. It was definitely helpful for me for sure.
Yeah, that comment about finding people who you might go sell into or sort of as a tangential industry is really important. We did that early. Our CEO actually, she's a phenomenal networker, and she did this really well early at the company. And there was one person who was an early customer, but she knew through other channels and built a really strong relationship with. And at the time, he was kind of a mid-level marketing manager. Now he's a CMO of a company, and so the support that she gave him early, right? The opportunities for kind of networking, advancement, and introductions, and all these things that she offered early on. Those were incredibly valuable. And now when it comes to, sit down with us and talk about our marketing strategy or our website or whatever it is, this person is always willing to offer his time to do that, even though he's got a million other things, right? This is not a direct investment for him. I think that's a great point, Scott.
Yeah. Awesome. Love it. Okay. So we have so many, thank you so much for your engagement, everyone. We've got some excellent questions. So I'm going to keep rolling with them. So we have Raphael, who is a sales manager, and his biggest struggle about following up the connections that I built. So he's good at planting the seeds, but he struggles to make it grow. The first contact is easy, goes really well, but then on the long term, it's harder for him because he feels like he's bothering people when I solicit them. Can you help him kind of learn how to grow those in a natural way that doesn't seem like he's annoying them?
Yeah. So I would say that's a very situation dependent question. I mean, everyone, there are some people, for instance, so I like to get on Twitter, and there are some people where, you'll tweet at them and they'll respond to you in 10 seconds. You can talk to them literally every single day and they're happy to respond and engage. You have other people who, maybe once in a blue moon, they're going to come back and have something witty to respond to you with. People have different cadences. And so part of this, I think, is you have to figure out what that cadence is for those people. And that's one of the reasons why I found that it's good to segment the types of people that you, or the way that you engage with different people. So you might have those 2 or 3 people where you have a really, really strong, close relationship, and they don't mind engaging with you a lot. I mean, think of it from the perspective of your social circle. So most people will have a couple of really close friends that they can hang out with, maybe not every day, but a couple times a week, and there's no problem, right? They enjoy it, they have a great time, they don't get tired of each other. You have other people who are like, I'm happy if I just see you once a quarter. I'm totally okay with that.
Once a year is totally fine.
You're done, right? Yeah, it's all Christmas maybe. But you have there's a different cadence there, right? And there's sort of a different understanding. I think that's part of it, is really understanding how you segment your audience, what's the relationship you have with these people, and then figuring out kind of what. And some of it's a little bit of trial and error, right? In some cases, if you have a really strong relationship, you can ask people. You can say, hey, I know we talk a lot. Like, what's a reasonable amount of conversations we should have? Or that's somewhat of a crappy example, but you can ask them, right, and be very upfront about, hey, this is what I'm kind of thinking. Like, does this make sense? Like, how much do you have going on? I know we talk a lot online. It would be easier if we chatted in person. Everyone's got a different process, and honestly, I think a lot of times the big barrier in terms of how people build relationships is there's almost like a politeness, right? It's like you don't want to offend somebody or put yourself out there. And I'm amazed at how many times just kind of being upfront and open about what you really need or what you're expecting and trying to understand what the other person is expecting or able to offer breaks down that barrier. And you can't do that at scale, but you can certainly do that with the closest relationship you have.
Yeah, definitely agree. And you mentioned something at the beginning of that point too that I think is super important when you're talking about, some people will sit on Twitter all day and respond right away. So finding the channel where those people like to live and like to communicate, I think is super, super important as well. I know in my pipeline and the partners that we deal with, I have certain people that, I can call 4 times in a row. They'll never pick up, but I send them one LinkedIn message and they're on it, or there's people that I'll send, 5 follow-up emails, and then I'll give them one call and they'll be like, oh yeah, sweet. Yeah, we're good to go. Like, so it's just all about finding that channel as well, I think is super important. That was a great point. Awesome. Okay, so we've got Chandra wants to know, can you repeat the name of the book mentioned earlier? So that's Chris Voss, Never Split the Difference. Okay, so let's go into, that's a good question here. Okay, so we dove into this a little bit. Maybe let's dive a little bit more though. So let's say I'm an individual contributor. I have a large territory. I have to reach out to dozens of people, on a daily basis. And we just kind of dove into this. How do I build connections and use these principles that we're talking about to build relationships at scale, at a grand, in a big way?
Yeah, that's so a lot of that comes back down to segmentation. So just like not every account's going to be the same, right? Some accounts are going to be more important than others. Some people are going to be more important than others for your particular situation. And so, figuring out kind of where you want to spend your time, where you want to build those relationships is really important. You can leverage technology to do so. So, internally, we dog food our own product. We use a Node platform to figure out, what are the different types of commonalities that we have with people, and what are those ones that are most likely to lead to a new opportunity. So we'll build lists. We'll figure out, okay, well, these are people where we think we have an opportunity to build maybe a fairly superficial but still valuable relationship. These are people where we can facilitate a much deeper connection, maybe because that person is very well closely connected to the company or our marquee investors or some of our executives. And those are the ones where we might spend more time. So it really requires sort of figuring out, what are you looking to get out of these relationships? What can you offer to these people? And then, what's sort of the segmentation that makes sense so that you can use your time effectively, but also make sure that you're spending your time, the most amount of time with the people where you sort of have the most reciprocal value.
Yeah. So segmenting, kind of building these personas, or kind of your, almost like an ideal customer profile, but like an ideal network profile that you want to go after. Find out, what's relevant to them, how they can help you, and then you're gonna be able to scale that because you can kind of, repurpose a similar interaction on multiple people. Is that kind of, yeah, cool. Yep. Makes total sense. Okay, so this one, let's go super actionable again, because this is something I still kind of sometimes find this difficult to do. So how can I go about actually, let's say I have some good connections with a lot of people. Referrals are great, right? Referrals can make or break a quarter sometimes. If you need a quick deal, referrals are amazing. How can I go about asking my connections that I have for referrals? Because it's a delicate thing, right? Because you've got this relationship, you don't want to screw that one up, but they have access to someone you want to get in front of.
Yeah. So asking obviously is important. Taking that step of asking is valuable. That you're not going to get there at all without doing that. So that's kind of step one, just being open to that. The secondary piece is it's really kind of just I would look at it as an extension of what we've been talking about today, which is around providing value. So just like if you're going to try to build a relationship with someone, it's much better if you provide value up front and help them with something that's of importance to them up front. The same goes for their connection, right? Because they're going to have the same sort of social capital investment that they've made to make sure that relationship is effective. And so they're going to, by sort of definition, operate in the sense as a screening mechanism. If they go send somebody, every idea or email or forward a phone call, if they do that all the time, right, they're going to lose that social capital with that person that they really value, and that relationship they really value. So what I would say is it's kind of, you take the similar approach, but use it as really kind of that third party that you want to go after. So if I know, Bob, and Bob knows Jane, and I want to get a connection to Jane, then I need to understand what Jane cares about, right? Just like if I was going to reach out to her in general, right? It's important for me to do that if I'm going to use Bob as an intermediary. And so I might say, hey, Bob, I noticed that Jane's been talking a lot about, the psychology of selling. I actually just, wrote a book about this, or wrote a blog article or read something or whatever it is. Would love to do this. Or, hey, I'm attending this conference that I thought she might enjoy. Would you mind sending this to her? So you can use that person as a proxy, and as long as you're providing that requisite value, right, that's actually a great incentive. That person is incentivized to go make that introduction, right? In this case, Bob is incentivized to make that introduction. One, because it helps facilitate and strengthen the bonds that he has with Jane. But two, right, that's another avenue that he has. Now he's done something, right? He's built his network, right, through connecting with you. So there's a nice alignment of incentives in that case where you can take a similar approach, but really just use it through an intermediary to help kind of get to a place where you need to go.
I love that. That's a great point. So you got to basically showcase to Bob that you're worth it and that you've done your research, and then that will be incentive. Like Bob should almost feel like he wants to kind of show you off, right? Yeah. That should be his feeling. I like it.
One other thing to add to that is, oftentimes, and I'm terrible at this. I'm really bad at self-promotion, but oftentimes that's really valuable if you do it well. And so, if you're emailing Bob in this example, you can refer to all the things that you think you can do to provide value to Jane, but you can also tell Bob, hey, what would I would appreciate if you could tell her this. Maybe that there's a bit of a background about you that he finds interesting or something that might be relevant. Because that's coming from someone that Jane presumably already trusts, there's a huge value add there. And so she's likely to be a lot more receptive to building that type of relationship and facilitating that type of connection, right? But the impetus is on you to go and sort of make that and sort of facilitate that in a way that that's really going to make sense for kind of what you're looking to accomplish.
Yeah, definitely. And then once you have that, credibility, then when you do get a chance to talk to Jane, you're already like 3 steps ahead of the sales process, right? You've got the trust already. You've got the credibility. That's awesome. Yeah. Okay, so we've talked kind of almost like 2 separate tracks, right? There's obviously the LinkedIn world. There's events, there's networking meetups and stuff. Do you see a distinction between, face-to-face connections and connections that occur strictly in the digital world? Like, do you have some connections that you are very close with that you've never actually met in person? And then further to that, how does your approach change, or do you treat them the same?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'd say anyone that's been in sales for long enough and has done both virtual and either field or some variation on field sales, right, understands the value of meeting face to face. Despite all the technology we have, I mean, there's something very primal about meeting someone face to face, even if it's not for a significant period of time. And I found that relationships that I feel are very strong online that have been solely online, if I meet that person for even 5 minutes at a conference, just totally changes the way in which we interact, right? There's a level of sort of trust and feeling of reciprocity that just does not exist through that virtual connection. So I firmly believe that there's not a substitute for meeting in person if the situation allows that, right? And I think if you're trying to build strong connections, again, focusing on the people that are likely to be the strongest connections for you long term, figuring out where they go, what groups they're a part of, what conferences they attend, where they're speaking. Those opportunities, even just to meet and chat for 30 seconds to a couple minutes, is invaluable. Now, that being said, right, that's not always possible. And there's way more people that we can connect with online than we can possibly potentially meet in person. And so I think with that, it really comes more down to the quality of the interactions that are important. So because you can't necessarily do all those things that sort of that build the trust mechanisms that you'd be able to use if you were talking in person, you have to do that through other mechanisms. And so you're not going to have the body language, the tonality; those things are very hard to replicate online. So just really, again, kind of going down to the point of, what does this person care about? Are we talking about things that are valuable for both of us? Are we talking in a very open, honest, and earnest way? That goes a long way towards accelerating your ability to build connections online.
Yeah, makes total sense for sure. You can't really replace that, the eye contact, everything when you're in a room. But slowly, I think through tech, we're almost getting there, close enough to start doing that. So that kind of brings us to a next point. So there's this tech that kind of tries to replicate that face-to-face And so let's say I've built all these relationships now. I've got a ton of strong connections, put all this advice to work. How should I be managing all of these relationships? And is there any, do you use any tech to help, keep up with all these relationships? Do you have like a personal CRM, or how are you managing them all?
Yeah, I think that aligns with one of the questions that was asked by the audience earlier, right? Which how do you leverage technology to do this? How do you manage this at scale?
Yeah.
And yeah, we use tech. So we use Node
Yeah.
internally. The Node's a great solution for us, right? We can sort of pick and choose and tag different people. Functions kind of like a personal CRM, right? We can tag different people and kind of understand what's the nature of the relationship. And it's a very personalized experience.
Yeah.
So that's a great way to kind of keep track of this. I also, we also use tools like Sales Navigator. I use Twitter a lot, so I'll kind of follow people who are both kind of personally and professionally interesting, and engage with them. Certain people much more often that I'm kind of more interested in and want to build strong relationships with. Some people I'll just comment on a post here or there, like a post, etc., and kind of go from there. So social media is a great avenue for that. You can also use things like, anything, the process of managing a relationship doesn't matter whether it's a sales context or not. A lot of the nuts and bolts are the same. So if you use a tool like an Outreach or a Sales Loft or a Yesware or whatever it is to manage communication, you can do the same thing at scale with other connections. And so the content of the message may be different, but you can still send them updates about what you're doing. So you might have, let's say 500 people that you're not really close with. Maybe those are people who would kind of get your quote unquote drip marketing campaigns. So maybe once a month or once a quarter, you send them something. Hey, here's what I'm doing. Here's what we're working on. Here's what's happening in our company or in my life, whatever it is, whatever the type of relationship you have with that person is. Then, your kind of higher quality quote unquote prospects might, you might send something that's a little more personalized. Then you may have those top 10 that are really, really valuable where you'll write out the actual message, but use technology to deliver it. So the workflows and the processes and the technology you can use don't really differ depending on whether you're building connections, looking to find a new customer, looking to find a new hire, whatever it is. It's just the content of that is going to differ depending upon what situation you find yourself in.
Yeah. Makes total sense. And I am personally super interested that you use Twitter a lot for connection. Okay. So it's actually one of my big 2018 goals is to up my Twitter game, because for whatever reason, I didn't see the value of it, like from a professional sense when it like first was like coming a thing, and like I'm big on LinkedIn and I do that, but I let my Twitter game slide. So how do you use it? Like you said, just comment, like similar as you would everything. You just comment, you're posting relevant articles, following the people that you find interesting.
Yeah, Twitter's interesting. There was the early days of Twitter. There was the quote, I think it was by Peter Thiel, who said that, we wanted flying cars. We got 140 characters. And I remember early on, people would put all sorts of weird, just completely arbitrary statements on Twitter, right? Like I'm eating a sandwich, or like I'm using the restroom. And I was always kind of questioning why that was valuable. I think Twitter's really bifurcated at this stage, and it's sort of moved into, in one direction, you have very sort of politically charged topics, especially with the kind of general political environment, which obviously we're not going to get into. But there's a lot of sort of just general political discourse, and it's actually where I get a lot of news and read from people that I find very interesting. Often people I inherently disagree with, but are interesting to kind of see a different perspective. And then there's also the business side of this, and Twitter is really trying to move into facilitating better business relationships. They're doing sponsored ads and posts, and they've made it a lot easier to find topics that are interesting, right, and people that are interesting. I think the most important thing to start is just finding topics and people who talk about things you're interested in, and following those people. And then the way to start building a lot of those relationships is just start engaging with them. And so I found that often just replying and thoughtful replies, frankly, as opposed to ones that are a little more trite, tend to get some engagement. And especially if you have a community of people that are following somebody, they'll often drive a lot of engagement. If you do that regularly, people will notice their pattern recognition. Oh, I see this person continues to write interesting things. In response, I'm more likely to follow that person. I am not a Twitter expert by any means, so I would take any advice I'm giving with a grain of salt. But I've just found that kind of replying with what people who are sort of influential, have more followers, talk about things that are relevant and interesting, the
Yep.
more I engage with people, the more responses and more engagement that I personally get as well.
Yep. Love it. Cool. Okay, so we are at time. So unfortunately, yeah, I wish we could keep this going. We got a ton of great questions, so we may have to do a follow up on this topic in the not so distant future. But Greg, thank you so much for all the insight. There's a ton of excellent takeaways from that.
Sure.
And yeah, so if anyone wants to get in touch with you, I know there's some more questions, so they can just hit you up here at greg@node.io or on Twitter, which we just talked about at Gregg Macbeth. That's the best way. Perfect. And just quickly before I let you know, I know we talked about this briefly, but how is Node.io, helping sales professionals today?
Yeah, so Node's looking at a couple of things. One, we've built a database of hundreds of millions of people and companies that we've been able to scrawl and create from the web and leverage machine learning to do so. So we look at the people and companies that might be relevant and surface characteristics that are sort of very personal to you. So one of the things we're testing in beta now is how is this person connected to you specifically? How are they connected to your company? And then giving you tools to be able to measure the impact of that when you're going out and selling to those people. And so it allows you to design in a much more data-driven territory, sales processes and workflows around how you ultimately connect with your customers or market with your customers.
Awesome. So basically just facilitates and makes easier everything that we kind of touched on today.
Yep. Absolutely.
Beautiful. Well, yeah, sales professional, go check out Node. And again, Greg, thank you so much. Thank you everyone for tuning in, and have excellent rest of your week.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Scott.